The Valkyrie had conquered 347 species across the galaxy. Their empire stretched across stars that humans could not even see with their strongest telescopes. For 10,000 years, they had moved from world to world, breaking civilizations like waves breaking against rocks. They had never lost a war. They had never faced an enemy they could not crush. When their scout ships first detected the small blue planet called Earth, the officers aboard laughed. They watched the humans through their sensors and saw a species still burning dead plants for energy. They saw nations fighting each other over lines drawn on maps. They saw primitive rockets that could barely reach their own moon. "Hi, Commander Thalvex received the scout report on his flagship, the Eternal Dominion." He was old by Valkyrie standards, with gray scales covering his tall body and eyes that had seen 100 worlds burn. He read the report twice and then called his admirals to the war room. "This species has no shields," he told them. "No faster than light travel. Their weapons throw metal at each other using explosive powder. They have not even unified their own planet." The admirals laughed. One of them, a young officer named Kyrthex, asked how long the conquest would take. Thalvex thought about it. 6 hours, he said. "Perhaps less. We will not even need to use our primary weapons. The sight of our fleet will be enough." He ordered 200 warships to make the journey to Earth. It was more than necessary. Against the Valkyrie, humans were like insects facing a storm. There was no contest. There was no battle to be fought. There was only the simple business of adding another world to the Empire. The fleet arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Earth time. They appeared in the sky above every major city on the planet. New York, Beijing, London, Mumbai, Moscow. 200 ships, each one larger than any building humans had ever constructed. Blocked out the sun and cast shadows that stretched for miles. Thalvex broadcasts his message on every frequency. Every television, every radio, every phone on Earth carried his words. "People of Earth," he said, "I am High Commander Thalvex of the Valkyrie Dominion. Your world now belongs to us. You will surrender all weapons. You will surrender all governments. You will surrender everything. Resistance will result in the complete destruction of your species. You have 1 hour to respond." He expected panic. He expected humans to launch their nuclear weapons in a desperate last attack. He expected them to fight, even though fighting was hopeless. Every species fought. It was natural. It was instinct. But the humans did something that Thalvex had never seen before. Within 30 minutes, the response came. The leaders of Earth's nations appeared on his communication screen. They looked tired. They looked scared. But they did not look angry. "We surrender," they said. "Completely, unconditionally. We will do everything you ask. Please do not harm our people." Thalvex stared at the screen. For a long moment, he could not speak. "You do not wish to fight?" he asked. "We cannot win," said the human who seemed to be their leader, an old man with white hair and sad eyes. "We know this. We have seen your ships. We have calculated your power. Fighting would only cause death without purpose. We choose to live." By Wednesday morning, the occupation was complete. Valkyrie soldiers walked through human cities without firing a single shot. Human governments handed over every document, every secret, every weapon. They showed the aliens where the nuclear missiles were hidden. They gave them the codes to their military satellites. They offered everything freely, holding nothing back. Thalvex stood in the Great Hall of the United Nations. Building in New York, human leaders sat before him like students before a teacher. They signed documents of total submission. They agreed to provide workers for mining operations. They agreed to produce food for the Valkyrie fleet. They agreed to everything. His officers celebrated around him. They drank and laughed and talked about the fastest conquest in Dominion history. Some of them were already requesting transfers, bored that there had been no real battle, but Thalvex did not celebrate. He stood at the great windows of the hall and looked out at the human city. Cars still moved on the streets. People still walked on the sidewalks. Children still played in the parks. Life continued as if nothing had changed. Something cold settled in his chest. a feeling he had not experienced in 100 years of war. Fear, he thought about the humans. They had survived ice ages that covered their world in frozen death. They had survived asteroids that killed most life on their planet. They had survived diseases that wiped out half their population. They had survived wars against each other that killed millions. They had survived everything that the universe had thrown at them for 200,000 years, and now, when faced with an enemy from the stars, they simply gave up. Thalvex did not believe it. He watched a human woman walk past the building below. She looked up at the great Valkyrie ship that hung in the sky above her, and then she smiled. Not a smile of fear, not a smile of submission. Something else. Something that Thalvex could not read. He called Lieutenant Psironix to his side. She was young and smart, with sharp eyes that noticed things others missed. "Watch them," he told her quietly, so the celebrating officers could not hear. "Watch the humans. Everything they do. Everything they say. Report to me directly." Psironix looked at him with confusion. "High Commander, the conquest is complete. What is there to watch?" Thalvex continued to stare out the window. The human woman was gone now, lost in the crowd of people who moved through their lives as if the most powerful empire in the galaxy had not just claimed their world. "I have conquered many species," he said slowly. "The Rithani fought us for 600 years before we broke them. The Vorn threw their entire civilization at us in one final battle rather than surrender. Even the collective, with their logic and their calculations, chose extinction over submission." He turned to look at her. "Humans are survivors. They have fought and bled and died for their world since they first stood upright. They fight over food. They fight over land. They fight over ideas. They fight over nothing at all. Fighting is in their blood." He looked back at the city below. "And yet they did not fight us. Not even a little. Not even a protest. They simply handed us everything we wanted." Psironix was beginning to understand. "You think they are planning something?" "I think," Thalvex said quietly, "that we have made a very serious mistake. I think that we have not conquered humanity. I think that we have invited them into our empire." He watched the humans move through their city, going about their lives, following every order, causing no trouble. 8 billion of them. All watching, all waiting, all smiling. "Find out what they want," he said, "before it is too late." But even as he spoke the words, part of him knew that it was already too late. The trap had been sprung. The Valkyrie just did not know it yet, and across the planet, 8 billion humans continued to smile and obey, patiently waiting for what came next. 3 months passed, and the occupation of Earth became normal. Valkyrie soldiers patrolled human cities. Mining operations pulled precious metals from human mountains. Factories built parts for Valkyrie ships. Everything worked perfectly, too perfectly. Lieutenant Psironix sat in her office aboard the orbital command station, reading reports from her surveillance teams. On the surface, everything looked right. Humans followed orders. They worked hard. They caused no trouble. Production numbers exceeded expectations by 15%, but the details worried her. She had spent 3 months watching humans. She had learned their languages, studied their history, observed their behavior, and the more she watched, the more wrong everything felt. The first strange thing was the questions. Human workers asked questions constantly. At first, this seemed normal. They were learning their new jobs. They needed to understand Valkyrie technology to work with it, but the questions never stopped. And they were very specific. A human cleaning crew asked about the power systems on the orbital station. They wanted to know how the energy moved through the walls. They said they needed to know, so they would not accidentally damage anything while cleaning. It made sense. A human cooking team asked about Valkyrie nutrition. They wanted to know what chemicals their bodies needed, what foods made them happy, what flavors reminded them of home. They said they wanted to serve better meals. It made sense. A human maintenance group asked about the neural implants that every Valkyrie officer wore. They wanted to know how the implants connected to ship systems, how they processed information, how they could be safely repaired. They said they wanted to help with medical emergencies. It made sense. Every question made sense. Every question had a good reason. And every question gave humans more information about how the Valkyrie worked. Cyrenix pulled up her analysis. In 3 months, human workers had gained detailed knowledge of Valkyrie shield technology, communication systems, power generation, medical science, command structure, and psychological patterns. They had done it all by asking polite questions and working hard. She requested a meeting with High Commander Thalvex. The old commander listened to her report in silence. His face showed no emotion, but his claws tapped against the table in a rhythm that meant worry in Valkyrie body language. "You believe they are gathering intelligence?" he said. "I believe they are studying us," Cyrenix replied. "The way a scientist studies an animal. They are learning everything about us. How we think, how we feel, what we need, what we fear." Thalvex was quiet for a long moment. To what purpose? They have no military. They have no weapons. What can they do with this information? Before Cyrenix could answer, an alarm rang through the command station. A patrol ship over the Pacific Ocean had gone silent. They sent a recovery team immediately. The ship was found floating above the water, all systems offline. When the team boarded, they found the crew alive but confused. 12 Velkar officers sitting at their stations, staring at nothing, unable to remember the last 16 hours. Medical scans showed that their neural implants had been accessed. Someone had connected to the implants and downloaded massive amounts of data. The officers remembered nothing. Thalvex ordered a full investigation. But before the investigation could begin, a second ship went silent. This time over the Atlantic, then a third ship over Asia, then a fourth over Europe. Each time, the crew was found alive but with missing memories. Each time, their neural implants had been accessed. Each time, nothing was taken from the ships. Nothing was damaged. Nothing was destroyed, but something had been learned. Thalvex called an emergency meeting of all senior officers. The mood in the room was tense. For the first time since the conquest, the Valkyrie were afraid. "How is this possible?" demanded Admiral Kyrthex. "Humans have no technology that can affect our implants. They have no way to reach our ships. They have no ability to—" "They have ability," Cyrenix interrupted. "They have been building it. Piece by piece. Question by question. They learned about our implants from medical conversations. They learned about our communication frequencies from asking about radio systems. They learned about our ship security from maintenance training." The room fell silent. "We taught them everything they needed to know," she continued. "We taught them because they asked nicely, because they seemed helpful. Because we never thought to wonder why a cleaning crew needed to understand power systems." Thalvex stood slowly. His old body suddenly looked very tired. "Close all human access to Valkyrie technology," he ordered. "Remove all human workers from ships and stations. Restrict all human movement to designated areas. No more questions. No more cooperation." The orders went out immediately. But as Cyrenix returned to her office, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Through her window, she could see the planet below. Blue and green and beautiful. Home to 8 billion humans. And on her communication screen, she saw the reports coming in from cities around the world. Humans were following the new restrictions perfectly. They were leaving the ships. They were staying in their zones. They were obeying every order, and they were smiling. Every camera showed the same thing. Humans smiling as they were pushed out of their jobs. Humans smiling as soldiers pointed weapons at them. Humans smiling as their freedom was taken away again. They did not look like prisoners. They looked like players in a game. Players who knew something their opponents did not. Cyrenix watched the smiles. And she understood something terrible. The restrictions were too late. The questions had already been asked. The knowledge had already been gained. Whatever the humans were planning, they'd already gotten everything they needed. The Valkyrie had spent 3 months thinking they were masters. They had spent 3 months feeling superior. They had spent 3 months watching humans obey and comply and serve. But the whole time, humans had been watching them. She thought about the missing memories on those 4 ships. 16 hours erased from each crew. What had happened in those 16 hours? What had the humans done? What had they learned? She thought about the neural implants. Every officer in the fleet had one. Every officer was connected to ship systems through their implant. If the humans understood the implants, they understood the officers. If they understood the officers, they understood the fleet. She thought about 8 billion humans, 8 billion minds, 8 billion pairs of eyes watching everything the Valkyrie did, 8 billion sources of data, all feeding information to whatever intelligence was directing them. The Valkyrie had conquered a planet, but the planet had been studying them since the first ship entered orbit. Cyrenyx sat down heavily in her chair. She looked at the smiling faces on her screen. And for the first time since she joined the military, she felt truly afraid. Not of weapons. Not of armies. Not of anything she could fight. She was afraid of patience. She was afraid of intelligence. She was afraid of a species that could smile at their conquerors while quietly learning how to destroy them. She was afraid of humanity. And somewhere on the planet below, in places the Valkyrie could not see, the humans continued their work. Quiet, patient, unstoppable. The game was only beginning. Deep beneath the mountains of Switzerland. In tunnels that no satellite could see and no sensor could detect. General Marcus Webb walked through humanity's greatest secret. The tunnels stretched for miles. They connected to other tunnels under other mountains in other countries, a hidden network that had been built over 40 years, so slowly and so carefully that even the humans who built it did not know its full size. This was the fortress, the heart of human resistance, the place where Earth's real government continued to work. General Webb was 70 years old. He had gray hair and kind eyes and a smile that made people trust him. He had spent his entire career preparing for this moment. Every decision he had made, every relationship he had built, every battle he had fought was all for this. He entered the main command room and looked at the screens covering the walls. They showed everything. Valkyrie ship movements, communication intercepts, agent reports from every continent, data stolen from neural implants, 40 years of preparation, 40 years of planning, all coming together perfectly. The people in the room stood when he entered. Leaders from every nation, scientists, spies, soldiers, the best minds humanity had to offer. All working together in secret while the world above pretended to be conquered. Report, Webb said simply. Dr. Sarah Chen, the head of technology recovery, stepped forward. She was small and quiet, but her eyes burned with fierce intelligence. We have completed analysis of the Velkar shield technology, she said. Our version is already better than theirs. We found 3 critical weaknesses they never noticed. When the time comes, their shields will not protect them. Colonel James Okonkwo, the head of psychological operations, spoke next. His deep voice filled the room. Cultural infiltration is proceeding ahead of schedule. We have identified the social pressure points of Valkyrie society. Their youth are already showing interest in human ideas. Concepts of individual freedom and personal choice are spreading through their ranks. We estimate 30% of occupation forces have developed positive relationships with human contacts. Webb nodded. This was the true weapon. Not guns. Not bombs. Ideas. He remembered the day humanity first learned about the Valkyrie. It was 1987. A young radio astronomer had detected strange signals from deep space. The signals were communications. Alien communications. And they spoke of conquest. The world's governments had been terrified. They had wanted to build weapons. They had wanted to prepare for war. They had wanted to fight, but the scientists had done the calculations. They had measured the power of those distant ships. They had estimated the technology level of the aliens. And they had reached a simple, terrible conclusion. Humanity could not win a military war against the Valkyrie. Not in 100 years. Not in 1,000. The gap was too large. Fighting would only bring death, so they had developed a different strategy. They called it the doctrine of defeat. The idea was simple, but terrifying. Humanity would not fight the Valkyrie. Humanity would surrender, completely, immediately. Without conditions, and then humanity would become the most useful, most necessary, most deeply embedded species in the Velkhari Empire. They would learn everything. They would connect to everything. They would make themselves impossible to remove. And when the time was right, they would transform the empire from the inside. It was a plan that required perfect patience, perfect discipline, perfect acting. For 40 years, humanity prepared in secret. They built underground cities. They trained specialists in alien psychology. They developed technology based on intercepted communications. They created networks of agents ready to embed themselves in the occupation, and most importantly, they prepared every human on Earth. Not everyone knew the full plan. That would be too dangerous. But everyone knew something. Everyone knew to be helpful. Everyone knew to ask questions. Everyone knew to smile and obey and make themselves useful. It was the greatest act in human history. 8 billion people pretending to be conquered. While secretly fighting the most patient war ever waged, Webb looked at the latest intelligence reports. The Velkhari were getting nervous. They had restricted human access. They had pulled workers from ships. They thought this would stop the infiltration. They were wrong. Every piece of information had already been gathered. Every weakness had already been found. Every connection had already been made. And most importantly, the personal relationships were already established. This was the part that the Velkhari never understood. They thought in terms of systems and technology. They thought humanity was gathering data to find technical weaknesses. But humanity was gathering something much more powerful. They were gathering friends. For 3 months, human workers had lived alongside Velkhari soldiers. They had shared meals. They had told stories. They had learned about Velkhari families and dreams and fears. They had become trusted, liked, in some cases, loved. Those relationships could not be removed by new restrictions. Those relationships existed in hearts and minds, not in access permissions. Webb smiled as he read the report from the Pacific Fleet. The young Velkhari communications officer who had helped with the neural implant access was named Threx. He was 23 years old by Velkhari counting. He missed his mother. He loved music. He had befriended a human woman named Maria who taught him to play guitar. Thyrex would never harm Maria, and Maria had gently, carefully, over weeks of friendship, introduced him to ideas that would change how he saw the universe. There were thousands of Thyrexes across the occupation force, thousands of Velkhari who had discovered that humans were not just useful workers. They were people. They had stories and dreams and things worth protecting. Seeds had been planted. Ideas had been shared. The Velkhari did not know it yet, but they were already changing. Webb turned to his command team. Phase 3 begins in 6 weeks, he announced. We will begin targeted information releases. Stories about Velkhari war crimes from previous conquests will reach sympathetic officers. Economic data showing how the human economy benefits the Empire will go to Velkhari leaders who care about efficiency. Philosophy texts about freedom and choice will spread through the soldiers who have befriended human teachers. He looked at each person in the room. We are not going to defeat the Velkhari. We are going to transform them. We are going to show them a better way. And we are going to do it so slowly, so gently, that they will think it was their own idea. Dr. Chen raised her hand. And if they resist? If they choose destruction over transformation? Webb's smile faded slightly. Then, we use the technical intelligence we have gathered. We shut down their shields. We disable their weapons. We take control of their ships through the neural implant vulnerabilities we have discovered. He paused. But we will only do that to prevent killing. We will never use our weapons to harm them. Only to protect ourselves while we continue the work of changing their minds. The room was silent. This was the hardest part of the plan. It would have been easier to simply destroy the Velkhari fleet. They had the knowledge to do it now. But destruction was not the goal. The goal was something much harder. Something that required more patience and more courage than any war. The goal was to make friends of their enemies. Webb dismissed the meeting and stood alone in the command room. He looked at the screens showing the Valkyrie ships floating above Earth's cities. "You thought you conquered us," he whispered to the empty room. "But we have been preparing for you since before you knew we existed. We studied your language. We learned your psychology. We mapped your social structures. We know you better than you know yourselves." He thought of the smiles on human faces around the world, smiles that hid 40 years of preparation. Smiles that marked the most patient resistance in galactic history. "You believed we were weak because we did not fight," he said. "But surrender was our greatest weapon. You invited us into your ships. You let us into your systems. You opened your minds to our ideas." He smiled the same smile that 8 billion humans were smiling above. "And now, slowly, patiently, inevitably, we are going to save you from yourselves," the work continued. Silent, hidden, unstoppable. Humanity was patient. Humanity had time. And humanity knew exactly what it was doing. High Commander Thalvex held the report in his shaking hands. The words on the page made no sense. They could not be real. They had to be some kind of mistake. But they were not a mistake. On the Valkyrie homeworld, 3 light years from Earth, something impossible was happening. Young Valkyrie were gathering in public spaces. They were asking questions. They were demanding answers. They wanted to know why they had to serve in the military. They wanted to know why conquered species had no rights. They wanted to know why their leaders made decisions without asking the people. These ideas had never existed in Valkyrie society. For 10,000 years, every Valkyrie knew their place. The Dominion decided. The people obeyed. That was how things worked. That was how they had always worked. Until the humans came. Thalvex threw the report across his desk. He stood and walked to the window of his command station. Earth hung below him, blue and peaceful, and full of 8 billion problems that smiled. How? He demanded. How did they do this? Saronic stood behind him, pale and tired from weeks of investigation. She had the answer, but she knew he would not want to hear it. "Stories," she said quietly. Thalvex turned to look at her. "What?" "Human workers told stories to our soldiers. Stories about human history. Stories about revolutions and freedom and ordinary people changing their governments. Stories about ideas that spread from person to person until they changed everything." She pulled up data on her tablet. Our soldiers listened. They liked the stories. They shared them with friends. They sent them home to family. The stories traveled faster than we could track. And the stories contained ideas. Thalvex felt cold. Ideas. Dangerous ideas. That individuals have value. That questioning authority is not the same as betraying authority. That there might be better ways to organize a society. She looked up at him. Ideas that are now spreading through our entire empire. Reports kept coming. Every day brought new imposiatas. Supply chains were failing at the homeworld. Key shipments were being delayed or lost. Investigations showed that the disruptions came from Valkyrie workers who had been in contact with human traders. They had learned new business methods. They had started asking for better working conditions. They had begun to negotiate instead of simply obey. Communication networks were slowing down. Valkyrie technicians who had worked alongside human engineers were questioning old procedures. They were finding better ways to do things. They were sharing improvements without asking permission from their commanders, and then the defection happened. Lieutenant Kirboth was a young weapons officer on one of the ships orbiting Earth. She was talented and loyal and came from a family that had served the Dominion for 12 generations. She was exactly the kind of officer that the Empire depended on. And one morning, she walked away from her post and asked for asylum with the humans. Thalvex read her statement 3 times. "I have spent 6 months working alongside human maintenance crews," she had written. "I have learned their language. I have heard their music. I have eaten their food. I have listened to their dreams. They are not the primitive species I was taught to despise. They are creative and kind and full of hope. They care about each other in ways that my people have forgotten. They believe that every person has value, not because of their rank or their family, but simply because they exist. I cannot serve an empire that destroys people like this. I cannot be part of a system that sees 8 billion lives as resources to be used. I choose to stand with humanity not because they forced me to, but because they showed me something better. 50 more officers defected that week. Then 100. Then 500. Not because humans had threatened them. Not because humans had bribed them. But because humans had befriended them, had taught them songs and told them jokes and treated them like people instead of conquerors. And in treating them like people, the humans had made them question what kind of people they wanted to be. Thalvex called an emergency council of all fleet commanders. The meeting was tense. Fear filled the room like smoke. "We must act decisively," said Admiral Kyrthex. His voice was sharp with anger. "These defections cannot be tolerated. We must make examples. We must show what happens to traitors." Others nodded in agreement. The old ways demanded harsh punishment. The old ways demanded strength. But one young commander, a woman named Silvera, raised her hand. "And what about their ideas?" she asked quietly. "If we punish the defectors, do the ideas disappear? Or do they spread faster?" The room went silent. "I have been reading the human philosophy that has infected our ranks," Silvera continued. "They have a concept called martyrdom. When you kill someone for their beliefs, you do not kill the beliefs. You make them stronger. You make the dead person a hero. You make their ideas more attractive to others." She looked around the table at the angry faces. "If we execute our defecting officers, we do not end the rebellion. We give it martyrs. We prove that the Dominion fears ideas more than it fears weapons. We make humanity's point for them." Dalvex felt the ground shifting beneath him. Even his own commanders were thinking differently now. The ideas had already spread too far. "Then what do you suggest?" he asked. Silvera was quiet for a moment. "I suggest we listen. I suggest we ask our people what they want. I suggest we consider whether 10,000 years of dominion might need to change." Admiral Kyrthex slammed his fist on the table. "This is madness. This is exactly what the humans want. They want us to doubt ourselves. They want us to weaken. They want us to—" "To what?" Silvera interrupted. "To treat our people better? To give conquered species some rights? To consider that there might be more to existence than conquest?" She shook her head. "If wanting those things makes me a human puppet, then perhaps the humans understand something we do not." The argument continued for hours. But Thalvex already knew how it would end. The council was splitting. The unity that had held the Dominion together for 10,000 years was cracking, and the humans had done it without firing a single weapon that night. Thalvex sat alone in his quarters. He pulled up the communication system and prepared an order. A simple order. A final solution. Destroy the human population centers. Kill them all. End the infection before it spread further. His finger hovered over the transmit. But the order never sent, because Thyrix, the young communications officer who loved guitar, saw the order come through, and he could not let it happen. He could not kill Maria. He could not kill the people who had shown him music and kindness in a different way of living. He disabled the communication relay. Then he walked to the other officers on the bridge, the ones who had also befriended humans, and he told them what was happening. Within an hour, every ship in the fleet had officers who refused to transmit the kill order. Not all of them, not even most of them, but enough. The weapons stayed silent, and on the planet below, humans continued their work. Patient.com. Unstoppable. They had not defeated the Velkari military. They had done something much more difficult. They had changed Velkari hearts. One friendship at a time. One story at a time. One idea at a time. And the transformation was only beginning. 20 years had passed since. The Velkari fleet first appeared in Earth's sky. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. And today, the old enemies gathered to remember how it all began. The garden was beautiful. It sat on a hillside overlooking the ocean, filled with flowers from 100 different worlds. Trees from Earth grew beside plants from the Velkari homeworld. Birds that had never shared a planet sang together in the branches. Two old men sat on a bench, watching children play on the grass below. One was human. One was Valkyrie. Both had gray hair now, and both moved slowly with the weight of many years. General Marcus Webb, now 90 years old, smiled as a young human girl chased a Valkyrie boy across the lawn. They were laughing, playing some game that had no rules, just joy. "Did you ever think we would see this?" asked Stalvex. His voice was softer than it had been 20 years ago. The anger that had once burned in him had faded into something that looked almost like peace. Webb shook his head. "I hoped. I planned. But I did not know. None of us knew. We were guessing. We were gambling with the fate of our species." Thalvex watched the children play. The Valkyrie boy fell down, and the human girl helped him up. Neither of them noticed that this simple act would have been impossible a generation ago. "When did you know it would work?" Thalvex asked. Webb thought about the question for a long moment. "When your communications officer refused to send the kill order? When Thyrex chose Maria over his duty? That was when I knew." He paused, because that meant it was not just a strategy anymore. It was not just manipulation. The friendships were real. The connections were real. Our people had genuinely learned to care about each other. Stalvex nodded slowly. He remembered that night. He remembered the rage he had felt when his order was refused. He remembered wanting to execute every officer who had disobeyed. And he remembered the moment when he realized he could not do it. Because part of him understood why they had refused. Part of him had also grown tired of conquest. The Valkyrie Dominion had not fallen to invasion. It had not collapsed under attack. It had simply changed. The change started slowly at first. Defecting officers were not executed. They were allowed to speak. They shared their ideas with others. The questions spread. The demands grew louder. Within 2 years, the Valkyrie had their first open elections. It was messy and confused and nothing like the perfect order of the old Dominion. But the people voted. They chose their own leaders for the first time in 10,000 years. The new leaders made different choices. Conquered species were given rights. Trade replaced tribute. The military that had once crushed worlds was rebuilt as a defense force that protected them. The empire that had been built on fear was remade on the foundation of cooperation, and humans were everywhere. Human diplomats helped negotiate peace between species that had been enemies for centuries. Human engineers improved technology across 1,000 worlds. Human teachers opened schools that taught ideas instead of obedience. Human artists created works that moved beings to tears who had forgotten how to cry. They did not conquer. They did not rule. They simply made themselves useful, necessary, wanted. And in becoming wanted, they transformed everything around them. Webb looked at his old enemy, now his friend. "I have a question I have wondered about for 20 years. Ask it," Thalvex said. "If you could go back to that first day, when your fleet arrived at Earth, would you do anything differently? Would you leave us alone? Would you destroy us immediately?" Thalvex was quiet for a long time. The children had stopped playing and were sitting together on the grass, sharing food from a basket. Human sandwiches and Valkyrie nutrition cakes, passed back and forth without thought. "No," he finally said. "I would not change anything." Webb looked at him with surprise. "Even knowing what would happen? Even knowing that we would transform your entire empire?" Thalvex smiled. It was still strange to see a Valkyrie smile. They had not learned that expression until humans taught them. "Before we came to Earth, I had conquered 93 worlds. I had killed millions of beings. I had built an empire on the corpses of everyone who stood against us. I was the perfect servant of the Dominion. I was exactly what my people trained me to be." He looked down at his old hands, covered in gray scales. "I was also empty, angry, tired. I told myself it was duty. I told myself it was honor. But the truth was that I had never questioned anything. I had never thought about whether what I was doing was right. I had never imagined that there might be a different way to live." He looked at Webb. "Your people did not defeat me. Your people did not destroy me. Your people saved me. You showed me that strength does not have to mean cruelty. You showed me that an empire can protect instead of consume. You showed me that the beings I conquered were people, not resources. He gestured at the garden around them, at the mixed species children playing together, at the world that had grown from the seeds of that first impossible surrender. Oh, this is better. This life, this galaxy, this peace, it is better than anything I could have built through conquest. And I would not have found it if you had not tricked me into it. Webb laughed softly. We did not trick you. We just showed you another option. The choice was always yours. They sat together in comfortable silence. Two old men who had once been on opposite sides of a war that never happened. A young Velkari woman approached them. She wore the uniform of the new Galactic Cooperation Council. Her face was kind, and she moved with confidence that came from growing up in a world without fear. Grandfather, she said to Thalvex, the ceremony is about to begin. They are waiting for your speech. Thalvex stood slowly, his old bones protesting. Webb stood with him. What will you tell them? Webb asked. Thalvex looked out at the garden one more time. Thousands of beings had gathered now. Valkyrie and humans and dozens of other species all standing together, waiting to hear from the commanders who had started everything. I will tell them the truth, Thalvex said. I will tell them that we came to Earth as conquerors. We believed humans were weak because they surrendered. We believed we had one. He smiled again, that learned expression that had become natural over 20 years. And I will tell them that we had never been more wrong. Humans did not surrender because they were weak. They surrendered because they were strong enough to wait, patient enough to plan, wise enough to know that the best way to defeat an enemy is to make them a friend. He began walking toward the gathering, then stopped and looked back at Webb. You could have destroyed us. You had the knowledge. You had the opportunity. When we tried to order the killing of your people, you could have shut down our entire fleet. You could have left us helpless in space to die. We could have. Webb agreed. But you did not. Even after we tried to murder 8 billion of your people, you chose to save us instead. Why? Webb thought about all the years of planning. All the debates about what humanity should do if they gained the upper hand. All the voices that had argued for revenge, for destruction, for safety through elimination. That is who we want to be, he said simply. We spent 200,000 years learning to survive. Learning to fight, learning to destroy. But we also learned something else. We learned that building is harder than breaking. That forgiving is stronger than revenge. That the future is more important than the past. He looked at the gathered crowd of mixed species, all waiting peacefully together. We chose to be better. And in doing so, we gave you the chance to be better too. Thalvex nodded slowly. Then he did something that would have been unthinkable 20 years ago. He embraced Webb. Two old enemies, holding each other like brothers. Thank you, Thalvex whispered, for not giving up on us. Webb held him tightly. Thank you for being worth saving. They walked together toward the ceremony. The crowd parted to let them through. Human and Valkyrie and a dozen other species watched as the two old commanders took their place at the center of the gathering and across the galaxy. The word continued to spread about the strange species from the blue planet. The species that had been conquered in a day, but had transformed an empire in a generation. The species that did not fight, did not resist, did not destroy. The species that simply made themselves necessary, made themselves loved, made themselves the friends that everyone wanted to have. They said humanity was weak because they surrendered. But humanity knew a secret that conquerors never understood. Sometimes the greatest strength is knowing when not to fight, and sometimes the greatest victory is one where nobody loses. In the garden on Earth, surrounded by friends who had once been enemies, humanity celebrated 20 years of peace, and they knew with quiet confidence that this was only the beginning. The galaxy was vast. There were other empires out there, other conquerors who believed that strength meant destruction humanity would meet them all, eventually. And humanity would greet them with smiles, patient, friendly, unstoppable. Not because they wanted to rule, but because they wanted to help. And in the end, that made all the difference.